It's unfortunately true that not all of our prescriptions end up being used by the people we think are supposed to be using them, or for the purposes we think that they're supposed to be used. I put up this little picture of heroin from the Bayer company up next to the OxyContin from the Purdue company to remind us that the stories we told about OxyContin being a non-addictive substance have been told many times before, including heroin being initially sold as a non-addictive alternative to morphine. I've got some other support. We're going to talk about risks of abuse and diversion and current trends within Washington State. So the REMS is specifically focused on long-acting opioids, of which there are now a host of brand name products and generic products. The only naturally long-acting opioid is methadone. The rest are put into delivery of vehicles that make them extended release, from fentanyl patches to Avinza to OxyContin to MS-Contin, etc. Many of the new extended release opioids are now designed to be abuse deterrent. So it's important to know what that means and what it does not mean. Abuse deterrent means it's generally harder to crush it, snort it, inject it, take it in any way other than the intended oral route. However, these drugs are no less addictive than any other opioid. You do become tolerant, you do have withdrawal symptoms, you do become dependent on them in the same way as any other. I think their usefulness is very limited. It's not clear to me, I haven't studied this, but it's not clear to me when insurance companies will pay for these quite expensive formulations, given that it may not actually be the patient who's going to abuse it, it's somebody else in their house. And so are they going to pay for an abuse deterrent formulation just because to a 65-year-old guy, simply because he has a 15-year-old grandson in the house? I don't know. But that's what abuse deterrent means, is it tends to frustrate alternate means of administration, but doesn't reduce the abuse liability, or at least the addiction liability of the compound itself. So one thing that's easy to do is to get rid of unused opioids. Everybody loves to save leftover opioids just in case, but we now know that's where teenagers get them. Some people troll through real estate open houses to get leftover meds. People know they're hiding out in your drug cabinet, and they should be locked or dumped. There has been some confusion and misinformation about whether these should be put in kitty litter or coffee grounds, and the FDA actually makes it quite simple. For especially harmful medicines, those that can be fatal with just a dose, flush them down the toilet, or if not, the sink. And the thought is that whether that adds to meds in the water supply, probably a lot less than all the meds that are in the urine of people peeing those out. So no ambiguity. Tell your patients to flush them when they don't need them anymore, because they're dangerous to have around. So opioid prescribing is evolving, but is still a very significant phenomenon in 2013. Nationally, it's probably peaked by 2012 or 2013. But in Washington, you can see that we are getting about 1.3 million recipients of acute opioid therapy and about 200,000 long-term recipients. The long-term recipients are about a decade older, and obviously they're getting many more days supplied, most of the days of a year supplied. getting many more scripts, about 15 rather than 2. And unfortunately, in Washington State, about half of all long-term opioid people get concurrent sedatives, which we know greatly increases, some studies showing as much as a 10-fold increase in fatal overdose risk in people concurrently prescribed opioids and sedatives. This will give you a sense of what happened earlier. We're showing 2003 to 2010 data with a lot of growth in hydrocodone and oxycodone, less growth in other opioids. We are beginning to see some moderation in disturbing levels of use by high schoolers. This is the 2014 data, national data of use in middle school, which would be the 8th graders, about 1%, the 10th graders around 3%, and then 3 to 4% in 12th graders. This is down from quite a bit higher numbers about 5 years prior to this, but still unacceptably high. Here is specifically Washington 10th grade data from 2012. You can see we're dropping from about 10% of the 10th graders to around 6% taking them to get high. And then of those who get high, how many have ever used heroin is really concerning, but it's important to know that's only among the group that used opioids to get high already. We do know that heroin mortality has increased enough to compensate for all the decrease in prescription opioid mortality that we've seen. This is showing drug abuse admits for opioids, which is the heroin in the green, is got that uptick, unfortunately, in just the past couple of years. This is to give you a sense that every section of the state is not equal, with publicly funded treatment admissions quite common up in the Bellingham, Whatcom County area, less common in some of the counties around Spokane. Crime lab cases with opioid results also overrepresented in the Bellingham area, Grays Harbor, Hoquiam, Aberdeen, Southwest Washington. So it is true that now the gateway drug to heroin is prescription opioids, and that over the past 50 years we've seen an inversion of what the first opioid of abuse is. Formerly heroin, and beginning in the 1990s it crossed over and became prescription opioids. So this is giving you a sense of the age distribution, where heroin is the primary drug. It's mostly among the younger people. They remain the highest risk group, this group that's 18 to 29, but unfortunately the group 30 to 44 is growing as well. So while opioid deaths, which is the top line, the prescription opioid deaths are decreasing, the heroin deaths are increasing. This kind of makes the point in another way, with the heroin deaths in red, the prescription opioid deaths in the yellow-green, and the total being in the blue, showing that it's not changing much. So opioid deaths initially 2002 to 2004 on the left, and then on the right 2010, 2013. Obviously the death rates have bumped up quite a bit, partly due to the shift from prescription opioids to heroin. And we're seeing deaths out on the peninsula, Kitsap County, Southwest Washington, and I think that's Snohomish County there. So, what happens? How do teens and young adults who are at high risk for addiction get access to opioids? They get it from their own prescriptions, whether that be for sprained ankles, wisdom teeth, their own chronic pain problem. They get it from their friends who may have had them for headaches or for other needs. Somebody in their family gave it to them, or they took it from someone else's house. We have been working here to really reduce how many opioids are handed out post-operatively. There's been a lot of work in the state with dentists to keep the amounts given for wisdom teeth down, because once these are prescribed, they start to float through the system and don't get disposed or locked up. So once the meds are available, then the question turns to what's the motivation to use. Certainly the social peer environment is important, and I think until very recently the notion was that prescription drugs must be safer due to defined dose, etc., than unidentified white powders or green plants that you're getting from drug dealers. But the fact is that opioids have an unfortunate respiratory depression property that some of the green plants don't have. Sensation seeking, get high, treat pain, escape, and there's evidence of a significant effect of family norms if parents are open, comfortable, readily using opioids for whatever purposes. Their kids are more likely to use them. And then, are you getting your opioids as a teen at a kegger or as part of getting an injury? And then, obviously, people's biological and psychological makeup determines how likely they are to be risked. Individuals who talk about their Percocet energizing them rather than making them sleepy or dysphoric are more likely to want to take the drug again. People who say, oh, I finally feel normal now that I've taken my OxyContin, as opposed to feeling agitated, are also more likely to abuse it. As I mentioned, parental messages are an important part of normalizing drug taking to teens, taking medications to relax. Then you have to realize what the kind of situation youth are in, what trauma exposure they've had, and how they might be looking for help for that. So it's important to realize that diverted opioids don't tend to come from drug dealers. They don't tend to come from the internet. They come from leftover medicines of family and friends. While we are beginning to see that opioid prescribing, abuse, and overdose and deaths are peaking, this has unfortunately been matched by an increase in deaths from heroin. We also know that although total opioid prescribing has peaked, the co-prescribing of opioids and sedatives like benzos does not appear to have yet peaked, and that is the most dangerous form of opioid prescribing. So it's your responsibility as a prescriber to do what you can to limit diversion. Educate your patients, don't prescribe extra medications, and let them know how risky they are to use by somebody who's not tolerant or the valid recipient of the medicine. So that's our training site for more information, and we keep news items on this site as well as the late-breaking policy and science world keeps changing. That's the end. Thank you.